How to escape from a sick society, breaking free from psychological control and conformity. In a world that constantly demands your silence, have you ever stopped to ask what is the cost of not speaking your truth? This video is not just a reflection, it is a confrontation with the system's fears and inner voices that keep you quiet while the noise of the crowd grows louder. Through psychological insight and philosophical reflection, we will explore why people fall silent, why you may be turning away from what matters most, and how to return to your inner compass before it's too late. This is not for those seeking comfort. This is for those seeking clarity. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by conformity or lost in a sea of voices that are not your own, you are in the right place. Stay with us not just to learn, but to awaken. Because change doesn't begin out there. It begins within, recognizing the decline. When society voluntarily abandons freedom. In the shadowed corridors of history, the collapse of a society never begins with tanks on the streets or barbed wire fences. It begins quietly and perceptibly when ordinary people surrender their inner convictions in exchange for safety, comfort, or simply the illusion of peace. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, reflecting on the descent of the Soviet Union into totalitarian rule, wrote not with blame, but with sorrow. If only we had loved freedom enough. If only we had been more aware, but we submitted not with resistance, but with pleasure. This submission, far from being coerced, was voluntary. It was the soft betrayal of the self. When a society loses its grip on truth, it begins to rot from within. Lies become currency. Silence becomes virtue. Fear dresses itself as reason. What drives this collapse is not merely the strength of the oppressor, but the apathy of the masses. The weary shrug of those who choose not to see. Most people do not sell their souls all at once. They give them away inch by inch each time they look away from injustice or justify another compromise. To understand this decline is to confront a painful truth that evil does not need monsters to grow. It only needs men and women who stop asking questions. Psychological survival in such a world demands more than knowledge. It requires courage, the courage to remain conscious when unconsciousness is more convenient. The courage to feel deeply when numbness is easier. This part of the journey begins with the mirror. Before we accuse society or the system or history, we must examine ourselves. Where in our lives have we submitted out of fear? What part of us has gone silent in the face of wrong? The architecture of totalitarianism is not built by tyrants alone. It is built by the quiet consent of the many. The decline of freedom is rarely marked by a grand dramatic fall. It is marked by a slow erosion of responsibility, of awareness, of integrity. And so the question must be asked, are we truly free, or have we simply become comfortable in our chains? 3 paths of escape: retreat, run away, or move forward. When confronted with a society that grows increasingly oppressive or sick, individuals tend to seek escape. Not all escapes, however, lead to freedom. Some offer only temporary relief, while others entrench us deeper into the system we aim to flee. In examining how people respond to growing control and conformity, 3 dominant paths of escape reveal themselves: the backward escape, the physical escape, and the forward escape. The backward escape is the most common and perhaps the most seductive. It invites us to numb our awareness, to shrink away from the discomfort of reality. This escape is made of screens, substances, and routines that distract us from deeper truths. Hours lost scrolling, nights spent drinking, days blurred in endless entertainment. These are not merely choices of leisure. They are unconscious withdrawals from a world we no longer know how to engage. But the cost is high. As awareness dulls, so too does our capacity to care, to act, to resist. We do not escape this system. We become easier to be controlled by it. The physical escape appeals to those who still see clearly. It asks, why not leave? Why not find a safer place, a freer land, a society less infected by decay? For some, this is possible and even necessary. But geography no longer guarantees sanctuary. In a globalized world, the sickness often travels faster than we do. And when every shore begins to look the same, we must ask, what are we running from, and are we running toward anything real? Both paths are understandable. They speak to fear, fatigue, and longing, but they are not enough. The third path, the forward escape, demands more. It does not offer numbness or distance. It offers engagement. It calls on us not to run, but to turn and face the reality, to rebuild from within it. This path is neither easy nor safe. It asks for responsibility and presence, but it is the only path that transforms both the self and the world. To choose the forward escape is to say, I will not disappear. I will not sleepwalk through history. I will see what is broken and begin to mend, even if only in small ways. Because the path forward does not start in some distant land. It begins in the decision to be awake where you are and to act with clarity where others choose silence. The forward escape, rebuilding reality through acts of freedom. To escape forward is not to escape at all in the traditional sense. It is not an exit from life, but a re-entry into it, more awake, more responsible, and more alive. Unlike the backward or physical escapes which attempt to avoid the sickness of society, the forward escape acknowledges it directly and responds not with retreat, but with creation. It asks a radical question: if the world we inhabit is broken, how might we begin to build a better one? The forward escape begins where you are. It does not wait for permission for perfect conditions or for the collapse of the old system. Instead, it calls on individuals to reclaim agency, to start building the structures of freedom within the cracks of the present. This is not an abstract dream. It is a lived practice. It can take the form of independent schools, alternative media, ethical businesses, or communities that choose voluntary cooperation over coercion. Each small structure is a seed of a different future. The power of this approach lies in its refusal to legitimize a broken system. Those who choose the forward escape are no longer pleading for change from authorities who thrive on control. Instead, they begin to withdraw their energy and invest it in something real, something built on trust, truth, and mutual respect. This is not utopianism. It is resilience. And in dark times, resilience becomes a form of resistance. Building a new reality requires courage because it means standing apart from the norm. It means being willing to be misunderstood, mocked, or even excluded. But every act of quiet creation, every decision to live differently weakens the grip of the system that relies on uniformity and blind obedience. When enough people live outside the rules without falling into chaos, they show the world that another way is possible. The forward escape is not a movement to tear down. It is a movement to build up, not an opposition, but an evolution. It does not need a leader or a central plan. It grows where people choose to live with intention, honesty, and courage. These parallel structures may start small, but over time they form a foundation strong enough to support something entirely new. To escape forward is to stop waiting for change and become the beginning of it. It is to stop asking for freedom and start living as if you are already free. Creating a new world, parallel society, and the power of resistance. A parallel society does not begin with revolutions or declarations. It begins quietly, often invisibly, with individuals who choose to live differently. It grows not through confrontation, but through alignment with truth. In a world dominated by control and conformity, the most radical act is to live freely and consciously. The parallel society is not a utopia built from fantasy. It is a grounded alternative born from necessity and awareness. Václav Havel, who lived under totalitarian rule in Czechoslovakia, called it the independent life of society. When the official system no longer allows room for truth, people begin to create their own spaces where truth can still breathe. These structures do not require permission from power. They do not seek to overthrow. They simply exist alongside growing stronger as the old system grows weaker. They provide refuge for those who refuse to comply, and more importantly, they plant the seeds of something new. Resistance is not always loud. It does not always take the form of protest or defiance. Sometimes resistance is a decision to speak honestly in a dishonest world, to create art that reflects human dignity, to teach children how to think instead of what to think, to run a business that serves people instead of manipulating them. These acts may seem small, but they are acts of defiance against a system that thrives on silence, lies, and submission. The parallel society is not a retreat into isolation. It is not a rejection of connection, but a redefinition of it. It offers a chance to reconnect with others who value freedom, truth, and mutual respect. In doing so, it rebuilds the fabric of society from the ground up, using trust as its foundation. It allows individuals to experience what it feels like to live among people who are awake, intentional, and alive. The beauty of the parallel society lies in its diversity. It is not shaped by one ideology or leader. It is shaped by those who care enough to live differently. Some may build schools, others may share food. Some write books, and others simply offer space to speak. There is no blueprint, only the will to begin. Over time, these scattered efforts form networks of life, resilience, and meaning. Creating a new world is not an escape from this one. It is a declaration that another way is possible. And when enough people believe that the existing system begins to tremble, not because it has been attacked, but because it has been outgrown. Healing through creation, acting, resisting, and restoring the inner self. In times of widespread conformity, and emotional numbness, creativity becomes more than self-expression. It becomes resistance. To create is to assert that the human spirit has not been extinguished. It is to refuse the flatness of a controlled culture, to introduce beauty where monotony reigns, and to speak truth in a world trained to forget. Acts of creation are acts of defiance, not only against outer systems of power, but also against the inner forces of despair, apathy, and fear. True resistance does not begin with slogans. It begins with presence. When an individual picks up a pen, a brush, an instrument, or simply chooses to speak honestly, they reclaim part of their humanity. In creating, we confront the silence that totalitarian systems impose, and we replace it with voice, vision, and meaning. Whether through writing, music, dance, film, or conversation, every genuine act of expression heals something that control tried to deaden. This healing is not a luxury. It is a necessity. In a society that encourages passivity, people forget how to feel. They become consumers of noise rather than seekers of truth. Creation reawakens the senses. It reconnects us to emotion, to insight, and to one another. It reminds us that we are not machines to be optimized, but beings to be deepened. Through art and action, we recover a sense of agency, of connection to life itself. The role of the artist, the writer, the builder, or even the silent witness is to stand as a mirror, not to preach, but to reveal, not to escape pain, but to transmute it. When we create from our truth, we offer others a path back to theirs. We say, here's what it means to be alive. Here's what it means to resist, not with violence, but with vision. In this way, healing becomes contagious. One person living authentically invites others to do the same. One voice that dares to speak draws out many others from silence. We do not need to fix the whole world. We need to light small fires. Acts of meaningful creation are these fires. They give warmth, they give direction, and they give hope that is not naive, but rooted in action. To heal is not to forget what is broken. It is to feel it fully and respond not with collapse, but with creation. The world may be sick, but creation is proof that something within us remains unbroken. Rising above paralysis, activating flow and Rausch to revive the spirit. In a society overwhelmed by distraction and emotional detachment, reclaiming our inner vitality becomes a revolutionary act. Many feel stuck, unable to move beyond the anxiety, boredom, and exhaustion that dominate daily life. The constant flood of information numbs us, while routines flatten our sense of meaning. But within each of us lies a capacity to awaken, to access deeper states of being that do not depend on external validation. These states are known as flow and Rausch. Flow is the experience of complete immersion in an activity where time disappears and the mind becomes focused, effortless, and alive. It is often found in acts of deep engagement, such as writing, building, creating, or learning. In flow, we are not escaping reality, but entering it more fully. We stop performing and begin to participate. Our attention sharpens, our ego quiets, and something essential within us reawakens. Flow is not only a psychological phenomenon, it is a spiritual one. It reconnects us to our purpose and reminds us of what it feels like to be fully here. Rausch, a term used by Nietzsche, refers to a heightened state of inner power and fullness. It is a moment of ecstatic clarity where the individual feels overflowing with energy and possibility. Unlike artificial highs, Rausch emerges from meaningful effort. It is the result of doing something that matters, something that stretches the self toward growth. In Rausch, we do not flee the world, we engage it with intensity. We feel ourselves become capable, purposeful, and alive. These states offer more than personal fulfillment. They are acts of resistance against the dullness imposed by systems of control. A society thrives when its people are awake, alert, and inwardly strong. Flow and Rausch cultivate exactly that. They transform passive consumers into active creators, numbed individuals into vibrant souls. And when more people live from this place, the grip of manipulation weakens. A controlled population is one that feels disconnected and powerless. But a population in flow and Rausch becomes ungovernable from the inside out. To rise above paralysis is to choose engagement over escape. It is to find those moments that ignite your mind and stretch your spirit. These experiences are not reserved for the gifted or the elite. They are available to anyone willing to be fully present, to work with care, and to seek meaning in action. In flow and Rausch, we do not just heal, we evolve. The true face of escape, looking honestly at oneself. Not all who run are fleeing danger. Sometimes we run from ourselves. In a world filled with noise and distraction, it becomes easy to mistake busyness for purpose, comfort for peace, and avoidance for strength. But underneath the surface, something within us knows we are not escaping the world. We are escaping the discomfort of truly facing who we have become. This is the hardest truth, that many of the chains we feel around us were not forged by others, but quietly chosen by ourselves. We submit not just to systems, but to habits of avoidance. We turn to screens when emotions rise. We silence our thoughts with consumption. We perform roles that protect us from judgment, but separate us from authenticity. Over time, we lose the ability to be honest with ourselves. We become strangers to our own depth. The enemy is not only out there, it is the part of us that prefers sleep to wakefulness, numbness to feeling, safety to truth. To look honestly at oneself is a radical act. It means asking hard questions. What am I avoiding? Where have I traded freedom for comfort? What stories do I tell to justify inaction? These are not easy questions. They require courage and clarity. But without them, escape becomes a cycle. We run not from oppression, but from awareness. And in doing so, we strengthen the very systems we wish to resist. True freedom begins with responsibility. Before we can change the world, we must be willing to change ourselves, not through self-judgment, but through awareness, to witness our patterns without shame, to see where we have betrayed our own values, to recognize how fear has shaped our decisions. This is not weakness. It is the foundation of inner strength. In times of social collapse or collective fear, the temptation to escape inward grows stronger. But real healing does not come from turning away. It comes from turning inward with presence. It comes from the willingness to see the whole picture, even the parts we would rather hide. For only when we stop lying to ourselves can we begin to speak truth into the world. To face oneself is to return home, to step out of performance and into presence. In that space, even the smallest act of honesty becomes a rebellion. And from that rebellion, something new can begin. Understanding others to awaken. Why do they remain silent? In the face of growing injustice, many look around and wonder why others do nothing. Why do people stay silent? Why do they go along with what they know is wrong? It is easy to judge from the outside, to see silence as weakness or ignorance. But human behavior is rarely simple. If we want to awaken others, we must first understand them, not to excuse passivity, but to see the fears, pressures, and internal conflicts that shape it. Most people are not driven by malice. They are driven by fear, the fear of losing their job, their status, their relationships, or simply their sense of safety. Speaking up comes with risk, and not everyone has the inner foundation to bear that risk. For some, silence is a strategy of survival. It is the result of years of conditioning to follow rules, obey authority, and avoid conflict. It is easier to believe what is comfortable than to face what is true. This is not a sign of moral failure. It is a sign of psychological overload. In complex systems of control, people often feel helpless. They assume their voice does not matter. They convince themselves that someone else will act. This is known as the bystander effect, where responsibility is diffused across the crowd. And when fear is added to the mix, the result is widespread compliance that feels natural even when it is deeply harmful. To understand this is not to accept it, but to gain clarity. If we want to wake others from sleep, we must speak not only to their minds, but to their hearts. Logic alone will not break the spell. Compassion, storytelling, and example are often more powerful than facts. People change when they feel seen, not when they are shamed. They awaken when they witness someone live with courage and integrity. If you see the silence around you, let it remind you of the silence within. Where do you hesitate? Where have you held back your truth? We are all shaped by the same forces. Some break free sooner. Others take time. Awakening is not a race. It is a chain reaction. Every act of clarity sparks another. Every choice to speak out opens space for someone else to do the same. To understand others is to resist the temptation of superiority. It is to remember that change begins in empathy, and from empathy, courage grows. Inner light awakening before it is too late. History does not always shout its warnings. Often it whispers. The most dangerous changes are not the sudden ones, but those that unfold slowly in quiet increments. A small law passed, a right removed, a silence accepted. People wait for the big moment, the undeniable injustice that will finally push them to act. But that moment rarely comes in the way they expect. And by the time it does, something inside has already grown accustomed to submission. The machinery of control does not rely on force alone. It depends on habit. It conditions people to normalize the unacceptable, to forget what once seemed outrageous. One compromise at a time, the moral compass shifts. And when people finally open their eyes, they often find that the world they once knew has disappeared, not with a crash, but with a sigh. Awakening is not about waiting for the world to collapse. It is about choosing to see before blindness becomes comfort. It is the willingness to feel when others choose numbness, to speak when others remain silent, to care when others turn away. This is not an easy path. It requires constant vigilance and a refusal to drift into apathy, but it is the only way to remain truly alive. The light within is not loud. It does not demand attention. It is quiet but steady, waiting to be remembered. Each time we choose truth over convenience, compassion over cynicism, action over passivity, we feed that light. It grows not in crowds but in individuals. And when enough individuals awaken, the collective begins to change. Do not wait for permission to awaken. Do not wait for the world to be ready. The time is never perfect. The path is never clear. But the cost of waiting is high. The longer we postpone, the deeper the roots of conformity grow. And one day we may look back and wonder how it all happened. Not through one great betrayal, but through 1,000 small ones. To awaken is not only to resist, but to remember. Remember who you are, what you value, what you will no longer accept. It is the return to clarity, to conscience, to courage. And from there, a new kind of future becomes possible. One built not on fear, but on inner light. The world may not change overnight, but the moment you choose awareness over denial, courage over fear, and integrity over convenience, you become the beginning of that change. The true revolution does not start in the streets. It begins within, and from there, everything is possible.